Well, first of all, Alex, thanks for letting me come on your show again. It's good to talk to you as always.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate what you're doing. I think your analogy that you just made, relative to the two shootings, and how that as a result of the first one, the Confederate flag has got to come down. They're digging up the remains of the Nathan Bedford Forrest in Memphis, Tennessee, removing the monument there. They're making an effort to remove anything that is remotely considered Confederate throughout the United States, all as a result of the shooting that you referred to. And then at the same time, absolutely no response whatsoever in regards to the fact that this was obviously a radical Muslim extremist who had personal vendettas against the United States and its military. And yet there's no connection to that whatsoever, no fallout, no ramification. There's no call in Congress to remove all things Islam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Your analogy is perfect. I think we understand, and that was the point of my column about the Confederate flag, was that this is not about the Confederate flag. This is not about, the slavery or the war between the states. It's not about any of that. It's about expunging the principles upon which America was founded and upon which the Confederate States of America was founded, and that is the position of liberty and decentralized government. And that's the thing that's been lost in this whole debate relative to the Confederate flag and the Confederacy in general, is that the war was fought over the centralization of power. Lincoln was a unionist in the strictest form. In other words, he did not believe in a voluntary union. Jefferson and Washington, the founding fathers, believed that we were a voluntary union of states, and that was the predominant view until Lincoln came along. And his idea was, no, we are not a voluntary union. We are a forced union. You do not have the right to secede. You must be forced to stay in the union. Now, I hear people that say, okay, well, that's true. States don't have the right to secede. Okay, really? Well, then that means that the colonies did not have the right to secede from Great Britain. How can we laud Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, and celebrate the Declaration of Independence from Great Britain, which was nothing more than states or colonies seceding from Great Britain?
And that's what the Declaration of Independence states is our right and our duty. And so why even have a states if we go with the view of Lincoln? You're absolutely right. And we're skipping this break. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then turn around and say that the southern states did not have the right to secede in 1861. I mean, either both are right or both are wrong. You can't have one right and one wrong. Another thing that's lost in this whole debate is that Lincoln hated Andrew Jackson's anti-central banking policy. You remember Andrew Jackson was the last president that we had that really was willing to take on the central bankers and root them out. He just had a hatred against the whole central. Jackson was the last president we had to fight the central bankers, and he literally rooted them out as much as he could, and they despised him, and they vowed to undo everything that he had done against them. And by the time Lincoln came along, if you go back and read the speeches of Lincoln before he became president, he was bold in his assessment that Jackson had, ruined the country, and he was against the central national bankers, and we got to bring back that institution into the country. And that was pretty much the platform of Lincoln. The platform of Lincoln had really nothing to do with slavery. In fact, Lincoln himself was a racist to the nth degree, and that's not just
I know, I've read his letters, and I haven't even gotten into it. People are childlike. I don't want to read it.
Oh, I know, but it's a fact. Racist. He was a racist. He basically said that the blacks were inferior to the whites. They would never achieve equality, even if they were not slaves. That the whites were the superior race. He wanted to take all of the blacks and ship them all off to back to Europe or Africa or someplace. He had a disdain against the black people himself. And that's something that people they've forgotten about Abraham Lincoln. His whole platform is to bring about a forced union and to centralize the banking system.
Yes, but it is true, just to throw in, that the abolitionists were Christians in the Republican Party and did spearhead trying to get rid of slavery, and their pressure by the end or the middle of the war finally got him to do it.
Well, virtually everyone in the country, with the exception of a very few people, saw the handwriting on the wall relative to slavery. Look, the other nations in Europe and in South America, like Brazil and so forth, had already ended slavery, and here's the key word, peacefully. Peacefully. Yeah, there wasn't a shot fired. There was no war. They did it peacefully. America could have done it peacefully. The vast majority of the country, North and South, recognized that slavery was a dying institution. Farm machinery was coming into existence. It wasn't economically feasible.
The cotton gin killed slavery.
It was not even economically feasible to continue slavery. The farms and the plantations that would, for some reason or other, want to maintain slavery as a means of production of their crops, etc., would be losing money big time. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew the moral evil of it. They wanted to get rid of slavery. Let's remind everybody, too, Alex, that it was the British Empire that forced the colonies to accept slavery.
They wouldn't let us have manufactured goods. We could only have agrarian. That's why people like Washington hated them so much. And then people say Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson put in the first Declaration of Independence to end it. The people at his house were like his family. And he was against the institution. But he couldn't even get rid of it. He tried to, and then they invert that and say that Thomas Jefferson was a horrible racist.
Yeah, that's such a distortion of history and such a mischaracterization of Thomas Jefferson. These men, most of our founding fathers at that point, were involved in various abolitionist societies. They were already involved in means by which slavery could be exterminated in our country. In fact, let's not forget that the trading of slaves ended in 1808. That whenever the Constitution was drafted, the article was placed in it that the slave trade would end in 1808, and it did. The slave trade ended. There were no more trading of slaves after 1808. And all of the flags that flew on the slave ships, most of them were British. They flew the Union Jack. Some were Portuguese, some were Dutch, some were Spanish. Not one single slave ship flew the Confederate flag. To make the war between the states primarily about slavery is the most mischaracterization of history that I can possibly think of. Yeah, let's not forget what the nature of the Confederate flag is all about. The Confederate flag is designed around St. Andrew's cross. Let me just give a little history here about the flag. The flag, but it was not a racist flag. It was not about bigotry and hatred and racism or anything such as that. It was the St. Andrew's cross. All right, St. Andrew, of course, was the brother of Simon Peter, the apostle of Christ. He was hung on an X-shaped cross at about the age of 90. And as a result, that X-shaped flag was a symbol of Andrew, the apostle of Christ, who was crucified on an X-shaped cross. Andrew was the patron saint of Russia. He's the patron saint of Scotland. The St. Andrew's cross on the Confederate battle flag was designed after the Scottish flag and in honor of St. Andrew. Let's not forget that about 75% of the Southerners in 1860 were of Scotch or Scotch-Irish descent. They were largely Scotch-Irish.
Yeah, that's where Jackson came from as well.
And so that's why when they designed the flag, they designed it around the Scottish flag and the St. Andrew's cross. Which, of course, is a picture of Christ. And that's why, for example, years and years ago, whenever men were not able to write their signatures and they was an X official document, they put an X. Well, why did they put an X? That was St. Andrew's cross. They were saying, I'm vowing under God that I'm signing this document. This is me. I'm taking a vow to God. And that's why they put the X. When people said Merry Xmas, or they wrote it, Merry Xmas, what was the X? The X was meaning Christ. It was a symbol of Christ and the St. Andrew's cross. So they were saying Merry Christmas. There wasn't anything derogatory about that. It was a respectful reflection of the St. Andrew's cross and a typical meaning of Christ. So the history of this it's nothing to do with racism, nothing to do with slavery, nothing to do with bigotry. And the whole essence here was we will not be dominated. Abraham Lincoln co-authored a 13th Amendment before the real 13th Amendment that we know today was ever enacted after the war between the states. They co-authored, Lincoln and three others, a 13th Amendment which would have forever codified into the Constitution and permanently ensconced slavery. Now think about that.